Hello, Auntie Anna, or Watersill. Today we're going to talk about aestheticism, Oscar Wilde, and serving. So please subscribe and like and comment. Let me know what you think. I'm sharing a lot of thoughts today, so I would love to start a discourse in the comments today, especially. Lately I've been feeling stuck in my artistic practices, and including these videos, been feeling a little bit like stumped. But then this book came into the mail and freed me from my shackles and took the pain away, and now I'm free again as a person and as an artist, and I'm feeling inspired, and I'm thinking about art, and I want to talk about that with you, if you don't mind. So let's jump into it. This version of the book it's got the picture of Dorian Gray, as well as 2 other stories, and an introduction by Gary Schmidgall. What's really stood out to me so far, I'm only like 30 pages in, but what's really stood out to me was the preface. Preface that Oscar wrote for the picture of Dorian Gray is kind of this nice list of dogma about art and aestheticism, and it really inspired me because I feel like I've been focusing a lot on content and on purpose and usefulness of what I make, and I've been focusing too much on the message. And I think what I've come to remember in reading this and reflecting on it is that I want to first just make something beautiful. That's the first thing that I want to do. And then I think with that, because I am a person who lives with morals and ethics and meaning, that will all show up in my work as it needs to, as long as I just express myself. So yeah, Oscar Wilde was a big key player in aestheticism in the 1800s and stuff. I think there is a lot of hedonism in aestheticism. Oh, I have my notes down here, by the way, so I might be peeking at them throughout, and that's okay, by the way. There's a lot of hedonism in aestheticism, and I think that's really creatively freeing, and it makes it a really great place to start. Maybe later on you delve into more functionalism, more realism, but starting just from beauty is so freeing. And in this preface, one of Oscar's quotes is, "No artist is ever morbid. The artist can express everything." And after reading that, I reflected on how a lot of the time when I feel backed up, like this week I was just trying to make a video and I kept stumbling on my words and the words just weren't coming out. And there's something to be said for like preparing for a video so you know what to say, but also just realizing that a lot of the time there are words that could be said behind my hesitations, and there are things I can express when I feel stuck. And just because I feel stuck, that doesn't mean that there's nothing to be expressed and that I want to express. It just means that I'm resisting it. That, and I'm probably focusing too much on content and not enough on just the beauty of expression and living artistically. The first quote that he says in this preface is, "The artist is the creator of beautiful things. To reveal art and conceal the artist is art's aim." I think that this is somewhat true and also somewhat not true. And I also think that it is a statement that also is attempting to protect Oscar Wilde's queerness in an extremely homophobic culture back in the day. But anyways, I think that when we make art, we are sculpting our truth and our reality. We're sculpting it regardless of how genuinely we're doing so. A part of us is concealed in our art, and we can never fully express ourselves in our art as much as we do show ourselves. I think it also just reminds me of in film school when they would say, "Oh, don't be too on the nose with your story." Like if I just say, "This is me, this is the thing," then it's just a documentary. And I mean, documentary is the whole thing to say about it. You know, a documentary can be art and it can be completely false, and it can be a total construction of whatever you want it to say, but the way that we express who we are through our art can conceal things or can reveal things in different ways. I think this statement, while it's said in a very concrete way, I think it's very flexible to interpret. And I think that's also exciting to think about, because the next line is, "The critic is he who can translate into another manner or a new material his impression of beautiful things." And it's a creative task to interpret and to critique something. And that's what I'm doing right now. And I'm translating this preface into another manner. And that feels very exciting to do. And I think that's it. I think looking at the critic and saying, you are an artist also, is a really exciting way to be, because I think that a lot of what I'm drawn to do, like with interviewing people and with making personal videos, I think there's a lot of critiquing how I'm feeling and what I'm doing and what is happening in the world and what people are doing. And sometimes it just doesn't feel like that's an art form, but it is. And so that was validating. And I think it was also really liberating to think, oh, you can be really creative with that stuff. Criticism should surround how perfect the art is to its form, not the content of it. Realistically, not aesthetically. I like when people review the content of things. I like to review the content of things. But it frees us from feeling cringe about art. We can just look at the art as what it is. We can look at the form first and the feeling second. That way, when we meet a piece of art, we don't have to immediately go, what the heck? This feels weird. We can look at the form and consider that first and say, okay, does this feel perfect for its medium, in this really objective way? And then we can dive into feeling if it feels necessary. And I like that thought a lot too when I'm looking at my own art as well. When maybe I'm making something and it feels maybe a little melodramatic or something, I can look at it and disregard the feelings involved and the content involved. I can just look at it and ask, how is this art utilizing its medium? Does it feel right with the medium? And I can say, yes, it makes sense. And I think I'm still learning, I'm still coming to understand how to criticize and talk about art without feeling, I think that we learned a lot about that in film school, just like, because there's the rules in cinematography or writing and stuff, there's all the rules that you learn, and then there's the breaking of the rules. How has someone innovated the standard rules of a certain art form? How has someone, with the way that they've made art, created discourse and disagreement among viewers? Another thing in the preface, Oscar says, diversity of opinion about a work of art shows that the work is new, complex, and vital. When critics disagree, the artist is in accord with himself. Yeah, I think something that I really like about art is looking at the reaction of everyone around who saw it. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, criticizing how well the art is perfect to its form, and as well as criticizing the content of the art, I think in a lot of ways those things can overlap, because when I watched Uncut Gems, I have some friends who didn't like the movie or something, but there's such a specific, awesome feeling of anxiety that movie evokes from you, and I think it's because they perfected how they used the medium of film and of editing and cinematography and writing. Perfect is a big word, but I think they perfected how they used the medium in that film in a way that created such an intense response, and at the time evoked a lot of interesting conversation around the movie, because the way that they use the medium evokes a feeling in me, but then there's the content and the feeling inside of the movie that maybe even didn't speak to me all that much, but maybe it was, I do feel like it was the way that they used the medium that evoked more of a response in me than the content, because they could have had the same script and told the story in an entirely different way, and I wouldn't have felt the same intensity. And it makes me think as well of like commentary videos. That's an art as well. You can sit and watch a video and comment on it, and it can be bland, but when you do it in a creative way and create an entire new thing from it, I think that's really fun. I also guess I wonder about, because with commentary YouTube videos, they're talking about the content. Yeah, it's interesting, they don't really talk about the form all that much. My only criticism for YouTube's commentary video makers is maybe comment more on the form and less on the content, or balance it out a little bit, because that could be, I don't know, I think there's interesting things to play with in thinking more about the form. And I mean, I think they do. I think Colleen gave us something interesting to look at form-wise, looking at music. Later on in this preface, Oscar says, from the point of view of form, the type of all arts is the art of the musician. And from the point of view of feeling, the actor's craft is the type. So that was really interesting. I think just thinking about Oscar Wilde's words in terms of Colleen Ballinger's apology video, I think part of what made it so hard to watch, I mean, other than the obvious, is just that music is so much the type of form and like very straightforward, and then the context of something that is full of so much emotion and corruption be expressed in that way. The feeling is just not going to come across right. And I think it's interesting how music is the type of feeling for a lot of people. Maybe I've been saying form when I should be saying type. I don't know, you know what I mean. But if music is the type for form rather than feeling, I feel like in modern days, maybe in the 1800s that was more the case, and I do get that, like, I mean, a musician, I watched a documentary about Kings of Convenience yesterday, and their music is some of the most emotional feeling music I've ever listened to, but the way that they get to that point is that they have perfected this form. They've perfected their medium. And I mean, it took them, they had 20 years between records or something, like just a lot of years. They could have released something sooner, but they recorded so much stuff live, and like the arpeggios, or the harmonies and everything, a lot of it was recorded live. So it ended up just taking them a really long time and effort, but because they focused on the medium rather than the content, they could have just recorded it all on one day and said, here's a very emotional album that we've recorded, but because it's music and it's this type of form, they went along and they perfected the medium. And I think there's something so cool in being able to make something that's so full of feeling and emotion, like Kings of Convenience does, but also have like a really harsh eye for perfecting your medium. And like those two, they argue all the time, but they create something with such beautiful harmony. And I think that a lot of that comes from just them both having such a deep respect for the medium that they're working with. And I think a lot of time in the process of trying to perfect a medium, you can sound like you're being an asshole, but you're really just being an artist. Yeah, so that was also really inspiring to watch. I'm going to Bergen later this year. I'm so excited. I didn't know that Eric lives in Bergen still, so fingers crossed I run into that guy. Okay, I have some notes, so maybe I'll try to go through them. Something should be made less real to make the form better. And again, when I think about the Kings of Convenience, something more real maybe would have been to record it faster. I think I remember they said something along the lines of, like, the form demands it. The medium demands, and also just the tone of their music demands perfection. And that's not real. That's probably the least real thing about their music, is just the production of it. But I mean, they also seemed to do it in a very real way. They keep their team small, and they work in intimate spaces. They record in apartments and stuff. You know, I think there's still ways to be extremely real when you're creating something with perfection in mind, when you're trying to create art that perfects its medium. Sometimes in a journey towards perfecting a medium, you need to sacrifice realness and genuineness. And I mean, a lot of the time that just happens. I mean, especially in filmmaking, where there's a lot of editing and there's a lot of sitting somewhere and intentionally saying specific things at a camera. It's contrived. it's not entirely genuine. It couldn't possibly be. Maybe with painting and things like that, you can feel like you can be more genuine in a way. But yeah, even in painting, sometimes to perfect the medium, you have to move something in the picture that you're referencing a little to the left or right to make it more beautiful, and that's not real, but it's necessary towards perfecting the final form. Anything made with calculation is just not entirely real, and most things are made with calculation. And I guess it just gets my mind jogging about what even is being real. Adding other ingredients on top of your art to make it more perfect should be considered. When I wrote that, I was kind of thinking about humor and ingredients or instruments as well, like metaphorically. Later on in the preface, he also says, thought and language are to the artist instruments of an art. And there's obviously so many different types of thought, and there's so many types of language, literally our human language, and also even when I think about programming, what if you're making web-based art or something, literally with the way that you program it. And language also just in a more less literal sense. Humor as a language, seriousness as a language. Vice and virtue are to the artist materials for art. And I guess this can be personal or impersonal, like your vices you can use in your art, and your virtues you can use in your art. Yeah, I think even your weaknesses can help bring your art to perfection. Yeah, in your art, your vices and your virtues are virtues. Are both virtues. In aestheticism, they also talk about how content should be subservient to the form. What you're making is dependent on the form, and the form comes first. The medium comes first. Life imitates art, and art might categorize life. It thinks about life, but I like to kind of, in an exaggerated way, believe that life only imitates art. Even though, realistically, I know that art imitates life. But aesthetically, life only imitates art. Yeah, and I like that. When we see beautiful things, we want to bring those beautiful things into our lives. We want to be more beautiful. We want to live more beautifully. We want to be the beautiful TikTok girl or boy. And or maybe when we go to a park, maybe we realize we want to be outside more. Or maybe when we go to an art gallery or a film and it inspires us, we want to bring the aspects of that art into our life. And sometimes we do, and sometimes we just have to yearn for it. And I think we can often think, is art responsible for reminding us that not all of life is beautiful, and the things we see on TikTok, it's not the whole story, and people only want to share the beautiful parts of their life a lot of the time. And is that really such a fault, or is it that maybe we need to be responsible for the realism in our lives? And or how much of TikTok is art, and maybe you're allowed to just post beautiful things to TikTok, and then there's also other things posted to TikToks that say, hey, by the way, a lot of it's aestheticism and it's not realistic. And we know that, and we literally admit that on TikTok as well. We talk about, we literally comment and ask, what aesthetic is this? I think we're aware that it's an aesthetic. It's not reality, but sometimes we need to remember we're looking at a piece of aestheticism, not realism. I think the majority of that responsibility is on us as viewers rather than the art. But that takes learning, and I mean, a lot of the audience is impressionable, and I think that just takes more education that art might not be responsible for. We can live our lives with more aesthetic beauty and use it as a veil over our human imperfections. And I mean, I first got inspired to read Oscar Wilde when I was making a different YouTube video when I was scrolling Wikipedia, and I saw this picture by a photographer, I'm forgetting the name of it. He took a lot of pictures of icons in theater of the time, and but the picture of Oscar Wilde just stood out, and you can tell he just he lives imitating art, or he lived imitating art, and I find that so exciting to live in an exaggerated way and to veil your imperfections with living as art. There's a self-awareness to it as well. I don't think that Oscar, well, I hope that Oscar wasn't just veiling his human imperfections with dressing well and posing for pictures, serving I think he was aware of it. We can make ourselves subservient to the form of life that we want to perfect. We can perfect the imperfect medium of life through approaching it as art. And I think that's really cool. And it puts our humanity aside. It's not human. It's not real. This is the aesthetic way that we live. I think to prioritize aesthetics is not to deny realism. I think there's a lot of being real in art, and there's a lot of function that can be in art, and there's a lot of all that. But I think it can be just so much fun to prioritize aesthetics mindfully in a way that's not destructive, in a way that is fun. And it can feel really serious, but I think what really draws me to it is that it's fun and it's freeing, and it just says you're allowed to express yourself, and you know exactly how to do that, so allow yourself. The last thing I want to talk about is how art is not obligated to be useful. Something he also says in the preface is, we can forgive a man for making a useful thing as long as he does not admire it. The only excuse for making a useless thing is that one admires it intensely. All art is quite useless. And when I think about that quote, I think about how the intensity of useful art is in its usefulness, and so then an artist does not have to be as intense in his admiration towards it. Whereas a useless piece of art is made interesting by the passion and intensity that the artist has in admiration of his work, of her work, of their work. And if it had to be useful, then you could just be an engineer. Maybe not an artist, or maybe you could be both. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of gray area. In the aestheticism movement, they say art for art's sake, and I think that's just a really liberating quote as well. A lot of the time I get hung up on why would I make something, why, and I get worried about if I make something and then I present it, are people going to ask me why? But just thinking about art for art's sake, just making because you had an intense inspiration to do so, I think that's more than enough reason. Sometimes Oscar speaks on how art should not reveal the artist, and the further art is from reality, the better it may be. Part of me wonders if he says this in defense of his queerness, to protect himself in the Victorian era, which was brutal towards homosexuals. I do agree that when art is less on the nose, word for word, about an artist, it can be better. Even as someone who makes personal videos, I think I tend to admire my own work more when I'm experimenting with how I express what I'm going through, when I try to be less on the nose. I think I'm a very on the nose artist a lot of the time, and I think that's something that I feel like I struggle with. And then I really, a lot of my frustration with making things is that I want to be less on the nose. But I always just end up being more on the nose. With reading about all this stuff, I just, I feel more liberated to just go out there and make something that doesn't have to make sense to anyone. Yeah, okay. I think I tend to admire them more when I am being experimental with how I share myself, rather than forward and concrete. Even when I am being concrete, I enjoy being exaggerated. As a person, my opinions are fluid and always shifting, but when I express them in a form, I like to dramatically profess opinions. It makes them more fun to disagree and agree with. There is more to think about when we declare. I like to declare as if it is an ingredient in my everyday research, is something I wrote down. Just intensely declaring things. I think I do it in an aesthetic way a lot of the time. not in a realistic way. I think that's a feeling that I've been trying to put into words for a while, because like I love the writing of Rachel Tashjian, who's like a fashion journalist, and I think fashion journalism in general is a very aesthetic practice, because when you look and when you think about the purpose of fashion, you can very easily dig yourself into a hole of it's useless. You know, people need to wear clothes in this society, but apart from that, you know, why do we have to be so extravagant? And I think I like it so much because it is so much a part of aesthetics and aestheticism. You can be so dramatic and it's about a medium. A lot of the time there's no feeling or content, it's just about the medium. And you know, sometimes I'll wonder and I'll try to look into, what was the artist inspired by emotionally, and there will be no answer, and it's just them playing with the medium. And for a while that used to frustrate me, because there was no purpose, there was no function, but I'm learning that I like that it's just aesthetic. I cut my bangs the other day and I'm still learning to work with them. There's something really interesting going on with my hair today. Okay, while art can strive for a function, it doesn't always have to, and I think I prefer to begin without an idea for function. If art is functionless, it should not be perceived as such. I think with art that could be seen as immoral. The issue may be with the public, as they might take it as functional and use it in a way that it was never meant to be used. This is not art's fault. Finding ugly meaning in something beautiful is corrupt. As Oscar says in the preface, he says, "Those who find ugly meanings in beautiful things are corrupt without being charming. This is a fault. Those who find beautiful meaning in beautiful things are the cultivated. For these there is hope." This idea is harder for me to declare, because sometimes there is space for art to be functional and ethical and moral, to have a message. And when I say that the art shouldn't be blamed, I assume that a principle in art is that it should not aim to cause harm. And I don't think harmless art should be blamed for the public's harmful understanding of it. And of course there can be ignorance in aestheticism, and I think to that degree aestheticism should be held accountable. The art that is bad and intends harm, that should certainly be blamed. But because it intends something and because it intends to have a function to harm, that makes it not aesthetic art. Because in aestheticism, the only goal is to make something beautiful. I'll end on this note. When it comes to realism, I think that there's beauty in reality. I think we can express realism in aesthetic art, and I think we see it done often in YouTube videos from creators like Hitomi and my friend Leah, who expose like really hard truths about their lives, but also have a major focus on presenting it in an aesthetic way. There is a hedonism to what they post, but also there is no denial of humanity and flaws and imperfection. I don't know. There are subgenres to aestheticism. It doesn't all have to be so hardcore and only striving for beauty. And I don't think I could only ever strive for beauty, but I do admire the intensity that Oscar Wilde drove into living aesthetically, and I'm inspired to live a life that imitates art through him. But admittedly, their vlogs keep a romantic and aesthetic eye on the way their content is being presented. And they will tell you that, you know? I mean, you're trying to make a video that people want to watch, and aesthetics are a part of that. Whether you're talking about the most morbid things or the most pleasurable things, you have to put the medium before the content, and that is simply what they're doing. In the end, it would be naive to expect any art to be entirely real, because all art is formulated and calculated to some degree, even documentaries. So we can just relax and accept what's being shared and consider how the form has influenced an artist to create in the way that they do. Anyways, thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment. And I'll see you next week.